I know. You have it at the top of your slideshow, right?
I didn't this time, but I often do, yes. All right, so can people see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, why don't we get started? A couple of announcements and so forth, and before we get started. First, an update on the election briefly, a reminder of the electrification pledge, an update on our leadership offsite strategy meeting coming up next month. That'll be excellent. Basic rules about political lobbying. I only have one slide on that because National will be giving us more advice soon. But I did want to at least get that one slide out so you could see. So let's move ahead. So this is the story on the election that we have right now. So you can see here where it says 24-25, where we stand today. In April, when the new leadership team, which is much like the old leadership team, takes over, the leadership team has approved that myself and Bruce Mazer become co-chairs of the chapter. Instead of me as chair and Bruce as vice chair, we decided that we're going to share responsibilities more, so it's more evenly distributed. And I think that'll be really excellent because we're running other teams as well, so that's important. The next thing is we have Pam Tate as campaign chair. She is unopposed, as is myself and Bruce unopposed. And we're happy to announce that Jeff Green has agreed to be vice chair to help Pam out because Pam is basically campaign's chair and she's in just about every other meeting. So this will really help her out by divvying up responsibilities a bit there. And then we have Cynthia Linton, unopposed for campaign from communications chair. And, contact Cynthia if you want to help out there as vice chair. I'm sure she could really appreciate some help. And in the past, we've had Jane Goldberg and so forth. And so definitely contact me or Cynthia if you're interested in pitching in to help out with communications, which is more important than ever in the world that we're in today. And then we have Vidya Bomi, who is our public education's chair, and she's unopposed as well. And she is very open to help for a vice chair in that position. So please, if you're into education or can help in any way at all, helping teams and people with education, just let me know or let Vidya know, but certainly me, and we can, give you a brief outline of the job description so that you know what you could be getting into to help out. In membership, we do have a serious problem with membership, and we have to thank Pam Tate for interviewing new members whenever she can, because that position's open. And unfortunately, Sarah and Teresa are not going to be able to move forward in April to help us out in that area. So if you're into membership with an eye on not just paperwork, but helping with engagement in the chapter, not only new members, but current members, let us know right away. Let me know right away on that. And then typically in the chapter, we have at-large positions. We have 4, as we did last year, which is Christina Murphy, Karen Dater, and Jeff Green. And Danica's son will be leaving and when she goes to college in the fall. So she will be recommending somebody to help in the youth area, in that area, as well as we really like to have the youth represented on the leadership team. So before I move on to the next topic, is any questions from the chapter on this? We okay, everybody? Speak up. And let me emphasize again, put your name and email in the chat so that you can get a copy of the slides, a copy of the video of this meeting, and also a copy of the chat. All right, we'll move on then. Wanted to remind you of the electrification pledge. This is nothing complicated or scary or going to lock people, in braces so they can't move. This is just an informal thing we'd like people in the chapter to consider. As my home appliances and vehicles reach the end of their useful life, rather than buying another machine that burns fossil fuels, we'd appreciate you considering to take a pledge to be ready to replace them with electric alternatives. So as the grid gets greener, or as you move on to solar power or community solar, these electric machines not only are great savings over fossil fuel machines, money-wise and emissions-wise, but as we move to more green energy over time, the tremendous reduction in emissions. So, and also it says that you'd encourage your family, friends, and community to do the same. Now, there's a second part that I won't bother to put up tonight that basically says that if you're an activist, you will use some of the same things that you learn here in this electrification pledge. You will use that in your communities and so forth, and in places of worship and so forth, to help get the word out on this. And I've got 3 links at the bottom of the page. So, for example, I'll just click on the training. So this is available right from our website on this electrification tab that you see here. And as you can see, we have 8 different training programs that do an overview on the pledge itself. And then the next thing that we have in the resource tab would be on, solar, heat pumps, Inflation Reduction Act, as well as estimated savings for doing these different things, which is really very significant. And then finally, the last one would be the pledge itself, that once you're convinced that you'd like to join us in making a commitment to plan and be ready to replace machines, don't wait until it's an emergency. When that water pump, that gas-powered water heater in your basement dies and you have to replace it immediately. No. If it's 8 or 10 years old, it's probably time to consider replacing it, or to at least be ready with knowing the direction that you would take in terms of an electric heat pump version. And so you can see the pledge that we have here. Take a look at it. We hope that you'll consider, this. Now, this strategy meeting, the leadership team is getting together. I mean, we got together at Pam's house last year. And it was really excellent because we got to, get beyond Zoom and spend a couple of hours really working on the issues and talking about strategies and how to go forward. And this is just a simple list of things that we're going to do this year. We're going to be meeting together in a conference room, and we've set aside 4 hours to do this thing in April 22nd. So in May, certainly we'll let you know how this went, and it should be very exciting, the outcomes. We'll be talking about everything, including things like the strategic plan, some of the barriers to our progress, things about regulation, outreach, engagement, and you can see the list here. I just want to give you a sense of what we'll be doing next month. And then finally, just a word on compliance here. So, I mean, we don't have time, but, frankly, National will be providing more information soon. But it basically says here that under the Internal Revenue Code, organizations like Climate Reality is a 501c3 organization. We're absolutely prohibited from directly or indirectly participating in or intervening in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate or elective public office. Now, it applies to all candidates, regardless of their, political, Democrat, Republican, or whatever it is. You just can't do it. And I'll just add that, so for example, our organization, the 501c3, is much stricter than a 501c4, which many of our organizations that do work like we do are not C3s, they're C4s, which permits them to do certain things that a nonprofit like Climate Reality can't do. So we're part of a national organization, so the rules are pretty strict. And generally, like, for example, if you had a Climate Reality t-shirt or banners and different things like that, generally these things would be fine to wear anywhere. But if you were campaigning, because politically, you're certainly allowed to campaign for this Democrat or that Republican, but avoid wearing the shirt because it would put across an image that Climate Reality is sanctioning this political position, which we cannot do. So there'll be more information coming from Leah, Assistant General Counsel, and when we get it, we'll share it with you probably in April. So is there any question right now about this? All right, so let's go on. Pam Tate, why don't you introduce this meeting tonight?
I will. I'm happy to do that. Well, I'm working closely with Pam Richart on this lobby day, April 17th in Springfield to oppose the building of CO2 pipelines in Illinois. And I want to tell you just a few things about Pam because she's a real dynamo. And I didn't know that she was an environmental planner and land use planner by training, but she is. But I know her as the co-director and I believe founder of the Eco Justice Collaborative. And they are based in Champaign. And they were formed about 2008. So they've been at this for quite a while now, 16 years. Trying to integrate environment, economic, and social justice issues, which are all the things we care about. She had many successes in her work. I'm not going to go through them right now, but just as an example, they took on the closing of Chicago's 2 coal plants and won. And as you know, that was the city's largest stationary source of CO2 emissions. So her work is right up our alley. And she has co-authored books and reports, and she's really been the driver behind the coalition to ban CO2 pipelines in the state. And when I'm on the calls with all the other groups, the person that everybody looks to is Pam. So I was able to get her to agree to really enlighten all of us about the issues so that we could get as many of you, and I will, but as others, to help us lobby against the pipelines and for 2 pieces of legislation that is in front of the General Assembly right now and which Pam will tell you about. So there you go, Pam, take it away.
So thank you, Pam, and it's fun to have another Pam. There's not too many of us around my area here. So I am going to just say, with respect to that campaign for Fisk and Crawford, if many of you lived it as I did, our organization recatalyzed an effort that had stalled, that had been put forth by groups you know well, like Environmental Law and Policy Center, like NEIS, like Environmental Research Foundation, like the 2 justice groups in Chicago, Little Village, and Pilsen, right to, oh heck, whatever their name is, or Peril. Pilsen Environmental Rights and Reform Organization. So so it had stalled, and we formed a coalition, and that coalition became one that went from about 6 groups who weren't talking to each other, by the way. There'd been all kinds of mistrust, to about 30 active and 60 total, and really formed the basis of what followed next, which was the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, first the Climate Table. And some of you know me from the Climate Table. And I say that because the work that I have been doing with the coalition has been largely with the Downstate Caucus. Now that I'm here in Champaign, helped get that off the ground, and founded that with Jen Walling in 2015 to work on FEJA. If you all remember FEJA, the Future Energy Jobs Act. And it was about the time I'm saying, as I left the leadership team, you know, we need to do more than energy if we're going to solve this climate crisis. And I'm really keenly interested in regenerative ag. So as I'm launching that part of the what's next with EJC, along comes this understanding of CO2 pipelines, and no one in the Clean Jobs Coalition is talking about it. Nobody that I knew in any environmental organization knew much, if anything, about it. And when I began to learn about the harm, I said, okay, this is something we can use right here, right now, affecting the central part of the state, to talk about the larger issue of carbon capture, transport, and sequestration. So it's been about 2 years that I've been doing grassroots organizing and working with folks. And our banner, our logo is a coalition to stop CO2 pipelines. Some of us think they never can be safe. Some of us think that as we move forward in the future with better design and the federal government adopts its new regulations, there could be a place for them. Some of us feel maybe so, but not till we have setbacks. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. The whole process and what are the risks of carbon capture, transport by pipeline, and sequestration, and what is this bill that the larger ICJC is now sponsoring? And it took a while to get to that point too. So, and then as Pam said, we haven't asked that you join us on Lobby Day. So if that sounds right to you, I will show my slides and off we go. And I think questions at the end might be good. I tend to like to talk. So I have to kind of watch how long I take on each of these slides, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. But if you've got something that needs to be clarified, what helpful, I have to go back and start from the beginning here. If you find that there is something that needs to be clarified, please, somebody call it to my attention, because there's nothing worse than going through a slideshow, not understanding what somebody said that, affects the rest of the presentation. So here we are. So hopefully with me messing this up here, you all see the first slide, which is the title. Okay, so we're going to go through this and talk about all three parts of the process. And there are three, the carbon capture, the transport, and the storage, right? So one of the things I like to say right up front is carbon capture captures the carbon. One of the reasons we're talking about it so much globally is because we need to stop putting more emissions in the atmosphere. You all know that. But it does not remove anything. It doesn't take anything out that's already there. And so we have to talk about not just stopping our burning of fossil fuels and not just the ability to keep doing things per usual and capturing, transporting, and putting in the ground. We have to talk about other things that I think maybe we could explore more in the Q&A. Just want to underscore that. So once the CO2 is captured, it's compressed, it's put into a liquid state. It's called supercritical CO2. It has properties of both a gas and a liquid, and it's transported by pipeline where it's going to be injected underground in geological formations. What Illinois has considered to be the best place to put it. Historically, it's been used for enhanced oil recovery, which, as you know, you can sequester some CO2 in that process. But when you burn that oil, you've really negated all the progress you've made. In fact, some say it releases four times as much as if you hadn't captured it at all, if you use it for EOR. So here's the target, and that's us, and I'm in Central Illinois, and let me tell you, we are a target. We have, as part of being here in the Illinois Basin, which really underlies the same formations as coal, if some of you have looked at this before, we've got the saline reservoir with a very solid cap rock that everybody who studies CCS says is a really great place to put it. Essentially, you've got teeny tiny grains of sandstone that are filled, the spaces between them are filled with a brine solution. And I say that that's important. That's going to come up when we talk about sequestration. You shoot it in the ground, hopefully at high pressure, so that you get it down as far as it needs to be, a mile or more deep. And it displaces the brine. Everything kind of becomes active and moves around a lot. And the plan is that you have this shale cap to keep it in place. And it hasn't happened. This technology has been around for years, decades. I've been talking about it since I learned about it, like since 2008, and it wasn't new then. But it wasn't profitable. So we've had some projects, and we'll look at those in a minute. But it wasn't until recently with Biden's Inflation Reduction Act that the incentives from the 45Q, IRS tax code 45Q, made this possible. And now there's so much money here. It is so profitable. Everybody is lining up to do it. And some of the tax credits are going to be used for these two coal plants, Prairie State, which many of you, I think, are quite well versed in, but also one in Springfield called City Water, Light and Power, needs an N there, and also natural gas plants. So Prairie State is actively pursuing CCS. And City Water, Light and Power has a pilot project in place already. And they're now looking at where they're going to put their carbon. But it's operational now. They're capturing about 10%. And then here in my neck of the woods, the corn growers and the Illinois Farm Bureau are looking at carbon capture and storage as really a lifeline to continue to make ethanol. Excuse me, so that they feel threatened by all the electrification of transportation systems and know that that market for ethanol is going to diminish unless they do something else. And that something else seems to be SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel. So this is an example of what's happening in my neck of the woods. We've got like I think 8 counties that are affected by carbon capture and storage projects. This blue area shows storage, and 22 wells that are under review by the US EPA. So it's quite a bit of activity that's going on. But has it been effective? I think as we talk about this together, some of you will have differing opinions than I, and I respect that. And I hope that as we engage in conversation afterwards, we can talk about those differences. I'm here to say I'm unabashedly concerned about it, and I don't think it's a technology that we ought to be pushing at this time. There are not effective performance standards in place to ensure it's an effective climate strategy. In fact, I can send you reports on how it's been abused. And it can, this is a key concern, it can extend the life of heavily polluting facilities. In other words, what you do with carbon capture is one of 2 things. You build another power plant. Well, that takes a lot of energy and et cetera to do it. Now you've got to power the plant. What are you going to power it with? You're going to use fossil fuels. Are you going to capture carbon from that? No, it doesn't have the equipment to do it, right? And where are our coal plants in this state? A lot of them are located in EJ communities. So this process allows those plants to keep running, and they're often running in places where there's already a pollution burden by folks who can't escape it, and that's a problem. It also requires a huge amount of water. I mean, a really huge amount of water, and very few people are talking about this. So Prairie State, again, I'm using this as an example. It's a coal plant, and many of you know it's the 7th largest emitter in the country of CO2, and that's a bad thing. But to put carbon capture on it would take as much water as is used by the residents of Ann Arbor for drinking needs every day. Every day. It's a huge amount of water. I don't know where that water is going to come from. So that's a concern. And of course, the other concern is if we do this, and there is so much, which I'll show you in a minute, so many projects underway that, the emphasis on this can divert critical financial resources from other things that we've all worked so hard for, such as renewables and energy efficiency and decarbonization of buildings and electrifying the transportation system, et cetera. So has it been successful? Well, you judge this for yourself here. Most of these plants, many of us remember Future Glen, at least I do, started in the George Bush era, and it wasn't canceled in 2015, and more than $1 billion was spent on a boondoggle that was expected to be able to continue us to use our coal here in Illinois, and power a plant that would in fact convert it would convert the power. It would convert it to syngas is what I'm trying to say, to minimize some of the particulate matters and other pollutants, and it would capture CO2 and transport it a short distance, 28 miles, I think it was, finally underground forever. But it didn't work. Here are other examples of projects that didn't work or withdrawn. Petronova has made the news lately. It has reopened. It has been used for enhanced oil recovery, which we just talked about, and it wasn't performing well. And the market for oil changed, and they closed, and they have just reopened. So we'll see where things go there. They're still using it for EOR. And I think their proposal, I mean, they're not meeting their targets at all. All of these folks have said, oh, we can capture 90% of our emissions. That ain't happening. The only one operational, except for Petronova in North America that I know about, that is functioning here is the one in Canada. And as you can see from these stats, it's not meeting its goal of 90%, and it's double the price of electricity. So has it worked? Not so well. So because of these concerns, the bill that we have now just yesterday or 2 days ago sent back to LRB. It does not yet have a bill number, but as soon as we get it out of that magical Legislative Research Bureau, it will. And it'll allow us to get some branding here. But it does require that the EPA, the Illinois EPA, issue a capture permit. Industry will tell you we don't need a capture permit. We've got everything we need to move forward. We don't need any new standards. We don't need any additional review. And I know that they're telling that's what they're saying, because I have, for some great strange reason, found myself as an organizer sitting on the negotiating team for the bill. So I'm sitting there with the likes of BP and ADM, et cetera. And that's what they're saying. You should know that. We think that the carbon efficiency rate needs to stay at 90%. Industry told us it could be 90%. Ethanol can be higher than that, but doing other industry like coal, and natural gas, 90% is quite doable. And now industry's saying is, well, let's change that and move that back to 75%. And we're saying, no, 90%. You told us when we did CJ you could do 90%. That's our target. We need a life cycle analysis because we don't want any project to create more CO2 than it's attempting to capture, right? And direct air capture is one of those solutions that has a real question about how much energy, how energy intensive it is, and whether it's not over its life cycle going to actually reduce its carbon footprint. I don't think it's going to do much. Let's put it that way. We can talk more about that later. And then an alternatives analysis. Some states like Minnesota have an EIS process for reviewing projects of this scale. Illinois is not one of them. So we tried to work that process into our bill. We'll see if we can keep it there. But right now, an alternatives analysis is required. What else can you do that costs less money, doesn't require the taxpayer to ultimately take responsibility? What else can you do that could have seen the same reduction levels of CO2 at lower cost and with less harm? And then the co-pollutant air pollution. If you're going to do this, don't increase dangerous pollutants that are harmful to people's health. And what about the water? We want to have that water impact analysis. And oh, by the way, if you're going to do this, people need to know about it. They need to help shape what happens. They need to have a voice in the process. So you'll see robust public engagement is consistent throughout. So what's been happening with pipelines in Illinois? One thing I can say is it's made me exhausted. We started out 2 years ago with Navigator CO2 Ventures, a 1,342 mile long pipeline that withdrew a couple times, and again has just reached a state of being canceled. And which I think I have here. Let's see if this works. Yes, okay, because I tried to animate these, but this is a PDF. So it essentially canceled its project after receiving 2 recommendations of denial from the ICC. CO2 pipelines are reviewed by the Illinois Commerce Commission by an archaic act really adopted in 2011 to accommodate future gen, and it's not well suited for what we're envisioning now. But ICC case manager Mark Mabel for Navigator, the case manager said, there's too many problems here. One is safety. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And we don't think that this project meets the legislative purpose and intent, and that is huge. About the same time that was under review, Wolf Carbon Solutions came along, and as Navigator is moving in and out of the process and getting their recommendations of denial, and that's due, I'm going to take a little bit of credit for the team that I'm working with. It's because of the work that they've done. So Wolf Carbon Solutions, well, they just withdrew in November. So October of 2023, Navigator cancels, and that project went through 5 states. Wolf is just through 2 states, and they have withdrawn on a temporary basis. Same kind of concerns issued by the ICC. And now guess what? One Earth, October, they entered the process. This is in my backyard. It's in Gibson City. And the ICC just issued a recommendation of denial. They have not withdrawn, and it remains to be seen what they will decide to do as time goes on. And we're still organizing in Ford and McLean counties to see if we can slow it down. So I mentioned CWLP before. That's a very real active project. So is Prairie State. They're getting their act together and finding ways to figure out how to work with the magic of being a municipal co-op and getting everybody to agree to what they do. But then again, lo and behold, now we've got the announcement from the governor that happened couple months ago that we are now working with Indiana and Michigan, and we have now a hub for hydrogen. Well, we could talk a lot about hydrogen, but I'll tell you, I'm not an expert in that. But one thing I do know is that when you're talking about hydrogen made, when you use natural gas to make hydrogen, you're using a fossil fuel, so it's not clean hydrogen. And then you have to capture the CO2 to make it green and transport it and put it in the ground. So, and then most recently, we have another one in Pekin. So we've got a new project in Pekin. So they just keep coming. So today, statewide, countrywide rather, we've only got 5,300 miles of pipeline. And what makes what we're looking at different is that these pipelines are mostly, not exclusively, but mostly coming from a natural source of CO2 and where they're capturing it, and then they're transporting it to a site where they're going to use it for enhanced oil recovery. And Navigator, to the contrary, had proposed 32 different sources of CO2 that would have to be managed for pressure, for temperature, for volume as they fed into their main trunk line. It was complex compared to what we're doing now. And as you see from the slide here, the potential build out, this is a slide from Princeton, and maybe many of you are familiar with the net zero study. There could be at least 65,000 new CO2 pipelines required to get us to net zero by 2050 if we use this as part of our overall strategy to meet target goals for keeping our climate habitable. Or as the Department of Energy says, it really could be more like 96,000 miles, because if you're looking at the dimensions and the diameters of those pipelines, you really be needing to look at something less than the 48-inch trunk shown here. And where is it going to all come through? Not all of it will come through Illinois, but there's a heck of a lot that's making it our way. And this is what folks like BP and British Petroleum have in mind. This is what they want to do. So what is the problem with CO2, Pam? It's in the air we breathe. True, it is. It is. I agree with that. It's the same thing that puts fizz in your soda. Well, yeah, it does. So what I would have ordinarily shown you until 2 days ago is a video that shows a test rupture of a CO2 pipeline that was very dramatic. And the DNV, the company DNV, based out of Norway, actually got after Vimeo and YouTube for what they considered to be a copyright infringement. So we cannot see this controversial video. And DNV is providing technical support for modeling to folks like Navigator. So I think that we as activists have been using this video to say, when you look at a test rupture of a CO2 pipeline, what happens? It explodes, a plume of CO2 that is visible, goes hundreds of feet into the air. If it happens in a natural condition, it's going to be hurling pipe and other debris as it goes up into the air. As the gas warms, then you don't see it anymore because it hugs the ground. When it comes out, by the way, it's minus 109 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's why you can see it, because it's like dry ice, and it covers the surrounding area with ice. And then when it warms, it hugs the ground and it moves. And depending upon atmospheric conditions and other things, topography, it can move a mile or more, which places people and animals at risk if they're living too close to it. And we know what it can do, because an accident happened with one of Denbury's pipeline in Mississippi. Many of you probably have heard this. A 24-inch diameter pipeline did in fact rupture. A weld was stressed. Climate change is doing some funky things with our rainfall events, and this in fact, heavy rains, days of heavy rains, caused the land to slip and slide, and the pipeline weld broke. And when it broke, it created an explosion in the ground 40 feet deep. That's what you're looking at here. All that white on the trees is the ice. And the CO2 plume lasted for nearly 4 hours and traveled 1.25 miles into a teeny tiny town of Satartia. People in its path became intoxicated. Many convulsed. Some lost consciousness. The first responders didn't know what had hit them. They thought it was a chemical leak, so at least they came with their air supply packs. They did not have enough oxygen with them to fully rescue people, protecting themselves. And there are harrowing stories of first responders without oxygen on their backs going door to door in Satartia to get people out. Over 200 people were evacuated, 45 were hospitalized, and some of them have long-term effects. And CO2, as you can see from the slide, also does, in fact, impair an internal combustion engine from being able to run, because it needs oxygen, right? So after that happened, federal government, okay, so this is when you say Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration 3 or 4 times in a row until you get it right. They, in fact, announced new safety measures in May of 22 that they were going to do rulemaking, right? And that rulemaking process is still going on. They did an investigative report that's worth looking up online, so you can read about what happened in Satartia and what they found. And that is ongoing and in process. So by now you might be saying, well, who regulates these pipelines anyway? And I'm here to say that most people think FERC does. FERC does oil and gas. Why not CO2? For some reason, they declined to take jurisdiction. And that's the words that has been told to me. They declined it. They have no jurisdiction. The Illinois Commerce Commission, we'll talk a bit more about, does approve the route, but they do nothing for setbacks. They make sure that the applicant has in fact coordinated its pipeline with PHMSA, who has the exclusive responsibility for the design, construction, maintenance, and operation of the CO2 pipeline. So this is all important to know where the regulatory gaps are, because CO2, as I just shared with the Satartia incident, does have some pretty important impacts on the human body that we need to understand. When it reaches a point of 4% concentration, it can cause confusion. It's considered to be in immediate danger to life and death by NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, because people get confused and they may not be able to rescue themselves, right? And anything that's in the 7 to 10% range means you can lose consciousness, you can convulse, and if it's 10% or more, you can go into a coma and you can die within minutes. So nobody has come up with a set of standards or requirements that would keep people safe via separation. So one thing, PHMSA is saying we're going to improve the safety and oversight of CO2 pipelines as it relates to design and oversight. And the state of Illinois and no other state in the nation has anything to be able to say, here are the standards for setbacks. If you have a pipeline of this diameter and this volume and this location and all kinds of readily available parameters that can be plugged into a model, then this is where that pipeline should be. So one of the things that we're saying is, somebody needs to do that. Somebody needs to say, we don't want to leave this to the developers, right? We want to make sure that the state of Illinois is the one to set the standards, and that's going to require a whole host of people. As you can see here, and the process should be transparent and should have public input. So the guardrail for this part of the process is this, and this is going to be released in our bill, and you can read it in a week or so. Before applying to the ICC, developers have to obtain an IEPA routing permit. That would be the permit that would say you've consulted with the public, you've consulted with the first responders, you've consulted with the community and the local officials, and you've had a robust public engagement so everybody knows what you're doing here with this pipeline. But you're not even going to come to the ICC until you can show us that you've got a capture permit and you've got a sequestration permit. Why are we going to look at a pipeline? And this is what's been happening with Navigator, Wolf, and also with One Earth. They don't have approval. They don't have their plans in place for capturing all of them. One of them, One Earth, does, but the one for Wolf Carbon Solutions does not have binding agreements with its major supplier of carbon, ADM. Nor do they have a binding agreement to sequester it in the ground with ADM. So it's wasting everybody's time. Landowners have to pay exorbitant fees to participate, to hire attorneys, and that just ain't right. And then, of course, the geohazard analysis, we've got earthquakes to think about. And in Illinois, in my part of the world, we have old room and pillar mines built with wood supports and wood roofs that are deteriorating, and the ground is subsiding. You don't want to put a CO2 pipeline there and risk that a weld will break. We need funds that are going to give the first responders what they need for staffing, for training, and for equipment. So because they're going to need that specialized equipment to deal with a rescue. And interestingly enough, at this point, we are supported by the Farm Bureau in prohibiting eminent domain. And we are actually supported by the industry for banning, no, that's not right. We are supported by the industry for banning the use of CO2 for EOR. We're recommending that we don't put CO2 pipelines through EJ communities, and that's been proposed to the south side of Peoria. And of course, the safe setbacks we've just talked about. So there's a whole bunch more, but I think that captures it. And then the final piece, sequestration. This is really interesting because I am living in the university town where Prairie Research Institute is the umbrella and is over entities like the Illinois State Geological Survey and the Illinois Water Survey, et cetera. And the university has received more than $300 million of grants to study capture and sequestration, not pipelines. So we have a bit of a difference of opinion here, and it's interesting when we go out and do public information meetings and hear from them as well. So we think sequestered CO2 can in fact leak. There's plenty of evidence that including a DOE report that I can make available to you that shows the pathways for escape that are shown in the slide here, which is a US EPA slide. It's most common for it to leak along injection wells and other boreholes. That's common, but it also can go through the cap rock, which is the seal. There can be fractures in the cap rock, but even if there's not, when it's been mapped, our Earth is a living dynamic system and things change, and we're trying to keep the CO2 sequestered for a very long time. So there are concerns about that, as well as the fact that injecting large volumes of CO2 can induce earthquakes. And that's a pretty big concern, because if you induce an earthquake, it doesn't have to be large enough to be felt at the surface, but it can in fact change that cap rock, which, by the way, is not a uniform layer. It varies in thickness, and it kind of goes like this and has natural pathways for it to leak potentially anyway. And if it does leak, CO2, when it forms with water, it combines with water, becomes carbonic acid, and that can contaminate drinking waters. drinking water. And it can, in fact, there is such a thing as too much CO2 for plants coming up into the soil. It can stunt crop growth. And more importantly, it can release CO2 back into the atmosphere. And from what I've read, it can take more than 1,000 years for that CO2 that's stored in a saline aquifer to become inert. Faster if it's stored in other formations, but saline aquifers, 1,000 years. And Navigator CO2 actually said, "Oh no, we think it's going to take more like 10,000 years for 90% of the stored CO2 to become inert," which I thought was interesting that they put that in their report. So we don't have a lot of history to show success. So you might have read about the Norwegian project that after 27 years began to leak, and it's causing concern. We do have ADM, and this is a plume diagram from the ADM Decatur project. It's been stored 1 million tons of CO2 in its first pilot phase, and since then it's been storing an average of 420,000 tons every year. Half of what's promised, less than half of what's promised. And you can see that from this diagram, that black area is the area of review where they do all their mapping and their studying, and it's moved out of that, raising questions about, what do you do when you don't agree to a project and now it's under your feet and you didn't want the project to begin with? That's called trespassing, right? So that raises questions like that, as well as, gee, were all the studies done for an area outside that black line? Projects in Illinois now are 100 times. If you look at everything that's being reviewed by the EPA, it's 100 times. 100 times the size of ADM's project. It's huge. We don't have the experience with this. It's highly pressurized. And when it moves horizontally, it moves laterally. As I said, has that area all been considered and mapped? And if it moves vertically, it's under pressure and it's going to be looking for the weak spots in the cap rock. How can we be sure it won't leak? We can't. Is anybody going to stand there before us and say, "I'm going to guarantee it's not going to leak"? No, they're not going to do that, and they haven't. And we know that methane, which behaves similarly to CO2, has in fact leaked in my neck of the woods. There is an area in Livingston County that is where methane has migrated above the cap rock, and it's still leaking after 30 years. That project, that leakage is so large, they don't know how to stop it. They're capturing the methane and they're shooting it back in the ground. But you can go online and read and look at videos on clear and present danger, and you can see it bubbling up towards the surface and what it's done to the crops. Same thing happened in Troy Grove in LaSalle County. And where I live, a documented leak in 1960s test required Peoples Gas to move its storage. And then in 2015, they had a well corrosion problem that did in fact contaminate water. And I am here to tell you that required a lawsuit by the state of Illinois against Peoples Gas, who would not take responsibility for this. But that lawsuit didn't include any money for replacing Peoples Water. Because it's a sole source US EPA that was affected, designated sole source aquifer that was affected. There's not a readily available supply of water. And so it's an expensive process to replace Peoples Water. So the General Assembly had to appropriate water. The governor finally signed off on it a couple years ago, but studies and engineering are still in process. And those folks, after almost 10 years, still don't have replacement water for their use. And we know that there's thousands of oil and gas wells across central Illinois, right? We once were an oil state before we were a coal state, which I didn't know, but we were. And so we've got a lot of abandoned wells, and the DNR says they don't know where they all are. And even plug wells are at risk because, the cement that's used to plug the well can corrode when it interacts with CO2. It's not going to last forever. And here's what can happen. An old well released CO2 near Wyoming, near a school in Wyoming, and required the evacuation and school shutdown rather for months. So again, we have some experience here. Illinois has 2 seismic areas. We all probably remember living in Chicago as I did then, feeling the quake, which I think was 2008. And they're both active areas, and we're looking at projects proposed in areas that could be affected by the Wabash Valley seismic zone, something that we're all going to have to be on the lookout for when these projects go to the EPA. The EPA does look at it, but it doesn't necessarily say, okay, now you can't do it. There's a lot of holes in the US EPA Class 6 regs. And I want to tell you that we're working with a geologist out of St. Charles who actually worked on the Class 6 well regs back in 2010. And he has been really helpful to point out the risks and the regulatory gaps that we put that we've addressed rather in our bill. And I did already talk about the induced earthquakes, and Class 6 does not address that whatsoever. Mohammed Aquifer, we've got sequestration being proposed in the recharge area and in 4 counties in the left circle there. That is a great cause for concern. And we're going to be exploring that more with experts to really build a case for why that shouldn't be done. But why would we want to risk water that provides, fresh drinking water, an aquifer rather, that provides fresh drinking water to 1 million people? So what are we doing? We got an IEPA sequestration permit that's required. One of the gaps that exists here in Illinois, which is really keeping industry from moving forward, is we don't have any regulations with respect to who owns the pore space and how in the world you're going to assemble or unitize pore space for sequestration. Those regulations do not exist. So as long as we move forward in the state, industry's kind of held in this holding pattern, and they want to get their bill passed right away so that they can start building these projects. We also are going to be stronger than Class 6 well regulations in a variety of areas. Some of those areas include things like requiring more monitoring and longer periods of monitoring, much stronger financial assurances, a much longer time for a project to be monitored than the US EPA is currently considering, which is more like 10 to 30 years versus the 100 years that we're proposing here, because it lasts so long. We want to make sure that the confining zone is not in a seismic area or a fault area. We want to make sure that those injection wells do not intersect with a US EPA sole source designated aquifer. We want to make sure that we've looked at all of those potentials for release of CO2 pathways that we've already discussed that are mentioned here. We want to keep it out of the Mohammed Aquifer, which I think I just said. And we want to ensure that the liability remains with the developer and operator forever, which it won't happen. But what we're asking for is to have a lot of financial assurances, and we're not looking, we're not going to allow things like insurance and self-bonding. They have to come up with cash up front, and it has to be put into reserves so that at such time as a company no longer is viable or operational or exists, the state then has money that it can use to continue monitoring it. And the industry doesn't want that. They want to turn these projects over to the state. And then lastly, it requires very robust public involvement. So by now you might be saying, okay, 2 years of this, people must be objecting, right? Well, they are. And this is all the work that has been done by the Coalition to Stop CO2 Pipelines to get townships to adopt resolutions and counties and cities to do resolutions, move into moratoriums to protect themselves as best they can, and then to get them to intervene in the ICC process. And we also worked on the Illinois Farm Bureau, had a campaign that actually resulted in some resolutions and some changes they made to their policy at their annual meeting in December. And that's not all. So we've got Wolf Carbon Solutions the same way, and now we've got One Earth, et cetera. So what do we need here? Last slide. We need a timeout, right? we need to have the time to make sure that PHMSA actually does what it needs to do to take care of those regulatory gaps that we could talk more about if you're interested on CO2 pipelines, to make sure that they're safe, that they're constructed as safely as possible. We need to take the time to make sure that the state of Illinois does its job and looks at those setbacks and develops threshold criteria based on readily available decades old studies, and some have been updated, but the studies still stand for we know how CO2 affects the human body. And they also need to make sure that they correlate those studies with the funding required to get the first responders the training they need to be able to rescue people safely and successfully. And so the moratorium will last if of the following things on this slide happen. Not all of them, just one of them. And one of them includes passing the regulatory bill. The other one relates to PHMSA and rules and the setback study. And the other one is if we aren't able to get anything done in 4 years, well, then we aren't able to get anything done in 4 years and the moratorium is over. So this is a slide that says we're encouraging you to sign up with us and come to us to Springfield on Lobby Day. We can talk more about that in the Q&A. Pam, I'm sure, has sent you information, but this is the time where we have the opportunity to connect with our legislators, and it's really important that we do that. This isn't going to happen by itself. And with that, I am finished. And so I will stop sharing screens and open it up for questions if that's appropriate.
Yeah, I would love it if Pam, if you could talk a bit more about Lobby Day itself, so that we can see if there are others from our region that might want to participate. We have 5 of us so far that are going to go down there and participate. And a lot of people here may think, oh, well, this doesn't affect Chicago. But actually, of course, it does. And so given the mission of our chapter, I really think that this issue is critically important. So I hope you'll not only ask questions, but that you'll really seriously think about helping the lobbying effort.
Bruce,
I know
Yeah.
Jeff has a hand up.
Bruce was first. Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay,
Real
Bruce, sorry.
competition between Jeff and I. Pam, excellent presentation. I really appreciate it. I have 3 questions. One is, my impression is that most of the carbon capture nationwide is not for sequestration, it's for enhanced oil recovery. But in Illinois, we have pipelines mainly for sequestration coming from other states, right?
Actually, the pipeline chain now is from ethanol plants. It's because it's the cheapest thing to do. It's easy to capture it and it comes from a cleaner source. The technology is there to do it. And so the projects that are taking advantage of the $85 a ton, the incentive, are all for enhanced oil recovery now.
Oh, they
But
are?
yeah.
They're all for enhanced.
I'm sorry, I didn't say that right. They're all for sequestration right now.
Right.
Yeah.
So Illinois is different from most other states because I'm aware that in most other states, it's being sent to other oil wells where they can do more oil recovery. But I assume the language that is in there for a life cycle analysis was put in there to basically knock out any oil recovery for Illinois, even though it's not really a problem right now in Illinois. Is that right?
It is not a problem right now in Illinois, but it very well could be, because one of the things that I looked at right away was where are the big oil fields, and the University of Illinois has tested, they've done some testing to see if some of the fields like the Fayette field, that's in Fayette County, Loudon Field, rather, it's in Fayette County not too far from Taylorville, I guess would be where I want to place it. They've already tested it and they can do enhanced oil recovery. It's ready, and they've already know how much oil can be recovered. So I am shocked because industry has agreed not to do this for EOR. most folks across the country, and I've been fortunate to be connected with many of the groups who are working on pipelines and carbon capture and sequestration in the Midwest, but also in California and also in Texas and in Louisiana. Everybody thinks the end game is the EOR. But here in Illinois, they said, no, we don't need it.
Okay,
And ADM and Wolf are working together to bring in pipelines from other industrial sources captured in Indiana, for example, and bring it into Illinois. So, but that would be from other sources besides ethanol, and they're still proposing to sequester it.
okay. And my last question before Jeff takes over is, so, I was just thinking of it, is the, oh, I just forgot. I'll let Jeff go and then I'll ask it again.
Never happens to any of us,
All
ever.
right.
Okay, Jeff.
Hi, Pam. So I'm thinking of how you approach perhaps a downstate representative. And so some of the things that occurred to me was ruptures. Okay. I think every article that I've ever looked at about CO2 CCS brings up that one incident. Okay, so it was terrible. There were 45 people hospitalized. There are more accidents that involve death and injury in the United States from oil, gas leaks, chemical leaks every day than those 45 hospitalizations. So it's a to me, it just invites the question of, well, is that all? What else? How dangerous is it? You mean in the history of CO2 sequestration, there have been 45 hospitalizations? You know,
I hear that question.
Okay.
I don't
let
mean
me just get all my stuff out and then you can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
The other thing is, it seems to me that they haven't been pushing for EOR in Illinois because Illinois is all about corn and ethanol.
Mhm.
So you're talking to a state representative who says 45% of the corn in the country goes to ethanol. You are proposing taking away that stream of income from my farmer constituents? Are you crazy? We could be losing thousands of jobs with this. So those were like two things that occurred to me that we would need ammunition
Sure.
to talk to.
Sure. Okay. So the second question first. Ironically, when you're talking to legislators here in Illinois, they are all about, especially Republicans. What's really fascinating, Jeff, is that it's the Republicans who are supporting the moratorium. It's the Republicans who do not want to see pipelines. It's the Republicans who are representing farmers who also do not want to see CO2 pipelines. So, so the interesting thing is you tie that with the safety concern and the fact that I didn't talk about this, but when you put a pipeline into the ground, right now, what's happening is the farmers are moving to a more sophisticated form of drain tillage. And you know, you're an environmental guy and you probably you might look at it the same way I do. It's like, I don't want to think about the way they're managing their water. I don't think it's all that great, but that's what they're doing, right? And so these pipelines kind of go kitty corner across without any regard for where the drainage system and timing systems are, and they're very expensive. So once you bisect those and you cut them up to put in your pipeline, then you've got a drainage concern that probably isn't going to be resolved, and that reduces yield, along with the fact that you are digging these big trenches and you are taking out prime farmland and you are bringing in other soil as backfill and they're mixing even though they're not supposed to. It's happening. They're working in wet conditions because everybody wants to get a job done when they've got a deadline, right? And it compacts the soils. So we have photographs from farmers we're working with that can show you signatures of pipeline construction from 50 years ago. So farmers are against it. And that's why and so are Republican representatives and senators. In fact, the sponsor of the bill is the moratorium bill is Senator McClure, who is in the Springfield area. So it's not hard to talk to them. It's harder to talk to the Republicans, to the Democrats, because they think that this is a climate solution. So what we have to be talking about with them is a bit different. And we do have talking points and we do have fact sheets, and I think that can help give folks here on the call the understanding of things that we think will work. And some of those, as you said, do relate to the accidents. And you're right. You're right, Jeff. There's only been that one accident. But guess what? How many miles of natural gas pipelines do we have?
Sure.
What, 2.7 million miles? And we've been doing this since 1861 or something like that. So yeah, of course there's accidents, but they're more localized. And what's different about CO2 is the fact that it does spread and it is toxic and it can cause brain damage and other harm to your body physically, even if you don't die from it. And if you're exposed long enough, you can die. And that exposure isn't that long. If the concentrations are high enough, we're talking minutes. So people are hearing that and we don't have protections for it. So rather than say no, never in hell, we're saying you got to have the setbacks to make it safe, right? You got to have the federal government do its work and give them time to finish it so that you've got the design of these pipelines that is safe, because the federal government recognizes that they had to do that. What they did in the 70s when CO2 became an issue, you might all remember Lake Nigos in Cameroon, the natural release of CO2 that actually killed 1,700 villagers while they were sleeping. That's when the federal government in this country said, oh, CO2, we got CO2 pipelines happening. Maybe we ought to have regulations. And so what they did is they took PHMSA's existing regs and went oil, existing, gas existing, CO2. And that's how they regulated it. And it's different. And so the federal government recognizes that there are regulatory gaps and they're working on it. And that's what I would say. We don't have that same level of experience. And so we should be, and we should be protecting our people.
So Pam, we have about 5 minutes for your question, please.
Okay,
Yeah,
can I just
I
ask
just
one more
want-
question?
So
I
Pam
just
had her
wanted to-
hand up.
I just wanted a quick thing, which is, isn't there an issue, Pam, with insurance companies and what they're saying about this?
Yeah, there is. And our last petition to the ICC talked about the uncertainties of being insured. We're having a hard time getting hard and fast responses from insurance underwriters, but most recently, one of the folks we're working with did. And her underwriter said, you're located in the sequestration area and you're going to have a CO2 pipeline underground. And if that happens, we aren't going to insure you. The end. Bye. It's been nice knowing you. That's American Family. Similar thing happened in Iowa, and I can send these to you, where State Farm Insurance said you will be uninsurable if an incident on your property happens relates to CO2 pipelines. Don't count on us. And the pipeline companies themselves are removing themselves as best as they can from that obligation and commitment. So it's uncertain. And I think it's uncertain in part because it's new. I'm living and breathing it, right? But most of us are finding that it's getting more media attention. People are now becoming aware, but the insurance companies, I don't think, have caught up with that. So it's uncertain. I would use that word at this time.
Bruce, you had
We're
a
going
question?
to have a training, Tom, we're gonna have a training on April 7th that we'll put into an action alert next week. That for people who either want to call their legislators or come to lobby day, so that you have the basic talking points needed for trying to move against this and try to get a moratorium in place at a minimum, a 4-year moratorium, which to me is probably our only chance. I mean, from what we've heard so far, the regulatory bill is not likely to fly, but the moratorium has, at least they said this, the lobbyist this morning said that he thought there's a path to passing it.
Okay.
So I
Bruce?
just wanted to note that there will be a 30 minutes to an hour training event on April 7th.
Isn't it the 11th, Pam?
Well, I'm sorry, what'd you say, Jeff?
April 11th?
I'm sorry, did I say 7? I think it's April 11, Pam, isn't it?
So put that, Pam, if you don't
Yeah,
mind,
11.
can you slide that into the chat, please? And I'll make sure to get it in the notes. Bruce, you had the final question.
one
We're
quick
almost out of
question.
time.
Yeah, one quick question. The moratorium, is that, the whole reason for Navigator and other companies taking the action now is to take advantage of the IRA Act and the incentives that are in there. Will the moratorium outlast the IRA incentives? No, so that problem will still be there after 4 years?
Yeah, the federal government has actually extended the date for those incentives and moved it out to January 1st, 2033.
Oh my
So,
God.
yeah, so what is happening here though, and I didn't have time to go into all this, but I think it's important to know when you're looking at sequestration and you're looking at the volumes being proposed, there are real concerns about pressure and pressure buildup. And it's gonna almost be who gets there first can do as much sequestration as they want to do, because if I've got sequestration wells here and my area of review overlaps with somebody else's, I can't inject as much because I will cause pressure buildup that will cause the rock to fracture and more damage. So I think everybody's there. It's like the money's there. We want to do it. We want to get it done quickly, and we want to be first so we don't miss out.
Okay. Any
And
final comments?
Okay, I'm sorry.
No final comments, Pam. We're almost out of time.
I know, and I could talk on this forever, but back to the accidents. They're all pipelines leak, all pipelines rupture, and the Pipeline Safety Trust says that the CO2 pipelines have a higher incidence of that, and I've got statistics to bear that out. So, I mean, I don't know that. I mean, if you want it, I'm happy to send it. I don't know that that's going to convince a legislator. You only have, 15 minutes to talk to him, but we've got that info as well. So I'm done.
Thank you
And
very much, Pam. I think this has been a great presentation. Any final comments? We're pretty much out of time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
Please sign up. Please sign up.
Yeah. Name in the chat.